Shalom. This week we are reading Parashat Vayechi, the last portion of the book of Breshit. You know that this week Yaakov avinu in Egypt, reunited with all of his family, has a very great prophecy. And it's a prophecy regarding the end of days. And he blesses his children. And he says to them, "Assemble yourselves, and I will tell you what will befall you in the end of days." And everybody knows that Yaakov didn't exactly tell them what's going to happen. We can see that in the verses. Instead, he began to bless his children. But you know, the Torah doesn't lie. And so if the Torah tells us that Yaakov is going to tell his children everything that was going to happen until the end of days, he told them. Somehow he did reveal that in the blessing. And you know, this was a very, very high level of prophecy. And according to the Holy Zohar, this prophecy was so great that it was on the level of the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the prophecy of Moses is contrasted to the prophecy of everyone else, that he saw through a clear glass, unlike all the others. And so this tremendous prophecy of Yaakov was on the level of Moshe, and the Zohar explains that's because while Yaakov was in Egypt, he was brokenhearted. This is actually based, it's kind of like a play on words. We read in chapter 42 and verse 1, and Yaakov saw that there were provisions in Egypt. And the word for provisions that's used here, shever, can also be read literally to mean brokenness. So the Zohar is explaining that because Yaakov reached this level of brokenheartedness in Egypt, he merited to have this tremendous level of prophecy, which was like the prophecy of Moshe. Because the Zohar tells us, prophecy is only given to the brokenhearted. However, this actually doesn't make a lot of sense according to everything that we know. First of all, why should Yaakov have been more brokenhearted when he was in Egypt than he had been when he was in the land of Canaan? Actually, we know, after studying about Yaakov's life, we know that the opposite is true. Yaakov, while he was in Eretz Canaan, never had a moment's peace. There was the trouble with Esav, there was the trouble with Lavan, there was the trouble with Dinah, there was the trouble with Yosef. He suffered a great deal. He even explained to Pharaoh that his days were few and bitter. But now that he's reunited, Torah tells us, Vayechi, Yaakov lived life to the fullest during the last years that he was reunited with his beloved Yosef and all of his family, and he has such nachat from his children, and he sees that his son is the viceroy over all of Egypt, and all his children are getting along, and he's not worried about a livelihood, and everyone is together studying the Torah. His children are all around him. So it seems to us that he is far less brokenhearted now in Egypt. But besides all of that, what kind of thing is this? What is this idea now that we are being told that prophecy needs a broken heart? This is actually the opposite of everything that we've always learned. Since when is it that prophecy is associated with brokenheartedness? We've always found in our sources that prophecy only comes about through joy, such as we find with the prophet Elisha in 2 Kings 3:15, where we read that when the musician began to play, that's when the Spirit came on him. And also we know from the story of Jonah that he also was overcome with joy when he went to attend the festival of the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the festival of the water libation in the Holy Temple. He received the spirit of prophecy. We've always learned that prophecy is associated with gladness and with joy, and indeed that can only rest upon a person through joy. So here we have a new kind of idea that's being thrown into the mix regarding Yaakov, in the words of the Holy Zohar, no less, that prophecy comes about through brokenheartedness. The answer to this really comes from another very important work, the Tikkunei Zohar, which tells us that a person who breaks his klipa, a person who breaks his surrounding husk, and that really means loosely his own Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, his negative character traits, a person who has mastered his own personality, is called a person who breaks his heart, a person with a broken heart. And this we can find, for example, when we look in Mishle, in Proverbs, we find the verse, Toevat Hashem kol geval lev, that Hashem is disgusted by every haughty heart. Brokenheartedness here refers to not sadness, not depression, but mastery over the self, and the breaking down of the ego and the personal gratification that a person has. And this actually is very similar to another important concept, and that is the difference between two words that we use very generically all the time, that we kind of mix around together. Two important words, kadosh and tahor, holy and pure. And most people think that the word holy refers to a higher spiritual level than the level of purity. Kadosh is holy and tahor is pure. But actually our sages teach us there is a very deep concept here. A person who is kadosh is a person who is kind of set aside from society. A person who might be, even as the expression is used disparagingly, a person who might be in an ivory tower. A person who doesn't have any challenges, who isn't really part of society. A person who might be really able to be very devout and very pious in his personal devotions between him and God, but he's not really rubbing shoulders with the masses, he's not really dealing with people. So the person is really kadosh, as opposed to a person who is tahor, a person is pure, a person who is actually in this world, in the nitty-gritty, in the thick of things, and has to rise, has to elevate, has to, in the midst of it all, of the worldliness, has to yet be totally focused on bringing the light of God into the world through everything that he does. So which person is really higher? Our sages tell us it's not the person who is separate from society, because actually a person could live his whole life as a kadosh, as a person who is totally separate and not really part of things, not really meeting with the underbelly, with the dirty side of things. A person might be so removed from this world that he's really able to worship and serve God in the privacy of his inner sanctum. But it could be that in his roots he hasn't really made any progress. He hasn't expunged, uprooted any of his bad midot, any of his character traits. He hasn't really dealt with any desires that might be bubbling beneath the surface. They haven't had the opportunity to come to the forefront. He's no tzaddik, necessarily. He's not really a righteous person. He just hasn't been tested because he doesn't allow himself to come into any sort of situation. So maybe you might even have a person who's never done a sin his whole life, but that's only because he's never been tested, so there's no real proof. And furthermore, this person, he might be really holy in his lifestyle, but he hasn't really done his job, because the job of a person in this world is to uproot the negativity from ourselves. And this is really the secret of what our sages are telling us here regarding the prophecy of Yaakov, and why he felt to be on such a higher level while he was in Egypt that he merited to the clearest level of prophecy, that of Moshe. It's because in the land of Canaan, Yaakov and his sons, they were very much isolated, they were very much separate, and they were able to really have their relationship with the Holy One, blessed be He, but they weren't so challenged. Now, when they went down to Egypt, they had to deal with primal forces, very difficult forces of darkness and of desire, because Egypt was known to be the place of licentiousness and of a lot of negativity. And this is exactly why the children of Israel had to be there in servitude, because the children of Israel proved themselves. They proved their worth, their mettle. They were tested in Egypt, and they kept themselves pure, even though they were in the midst of all of that. And that really is the difference between being holy and being pure. Being pure means being part of this world, but yet rising above, and yet being a pure vessel for Hashem. And so Yaakov's prophecy in the land of Egypt reflected this higher state of purity and dealing with the issues and really coming to a level of perfection. And this is actually a secret that is reflected in the words of our sages that we say every year on Passover night in the Haggadah. We say, whoever does not picture himself as if he personally was taken out of Egypt has not fulfilled his Passover obligation. And this is a code that our sages are employing. The idea of being in Egypt and being taken out of Egypt is the idea of breaking the husks, of breaking the ego, and of breaking the self-centeredness and the desires for self-gratification. And when we can do that, then we know that we have fulfilled our purpose. We've truly come out of Egypt. And this is the secret of the prophecy of Yaakov, not a brokenheartedness of sadness or despair or misery, but the breaking of the heart of the self and the perfection of personality that the Torah requires from us.